All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, since I'm the only one that can be seen, you only get my book cover, The Wheel of Time,
Yep.
Memory of Light. Heath is the Credible Hulk today, theoretically. That's his avatar. I had one for our lawyer friend that we were trying to get on for a while because he can't show his face. I had a meme that said laughs and hidden, and it's got one of those blurred out visions that you see when someone's like on a news show that they can't be seen though. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. So that would have been good today too. But no, we're gonna get on to Wheel of Time. We've been gone for a little while because Heath was out of the country, and we're still trying to get through the last battle. Like, actually, we should have looked ahead when you were going out of the country and either stopped before or pushed through before you
Hmm.
left. But it is a meaty chapter. In
Yeah.
my version, it's like 200 and something pages. I think in yours,
Hmm.
it's 190
It's
pages. Yeah.
yeah, it's almost 200 pages. So I thought that when we get to it, and then I thought, well, no, it's a lot of fighting, so maybe we won't have that much to say. And well, actually, because it keeps switching perspectives, and because there's actually yeah, the sections that are just a lot of fighting, we don't have much to say, but there's a lot going on in this chapter. So I don't know that we would have been able to push through because I was thinking that as I was reading up this time, and I thought, and then I kept flipping forward, like, surely we're getting close. No, 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 no. Okay. Yeah, it might take us a minute to get through here.
Yeah. Oh, before we get started, I just saw my shirt in my own recording. I meant to do this last time, but uh, Benevolent Savages is a group that does child trafficking investigations and stings and operations
Oh, cool.
across the world. And people I trust in the military special forces say that the money that they say goes to where it needs to go
Hmm.
actually goes there. So it's an expensive shirt, but a chunk of it goes to that other cause. So if anybody's looking, you can just it's Kijo Wear or something like that, but just search Benevolent Savages if you want to give to a good
Hmm.
cause. Uh, you know, we try
If
to
we're
do our part. I am not special forces trained, even though I have trained with them painfully. Uh, so they're doing a lot better job than I ever could on my own. So my money is my contribution to them.
Another, well, if you're going to shout that out, I will shout out the Nazarene Fund. Nazarene as where Jesus was from. The Nazarene Fund, it was started by Glenn Beck, and they do a lot of that because they were originally started to help get Christians out from the areas that ISIS was overrunning. And so when they go in to try and get these people out, a lot of them have been trafficked. That's what ends
Mhm.
up happening to them. And the reason you would appreciate them is because they do spend a lot of their money on post care, not just getting them out. So a lot of that money that you donate goes to therapeutic psychiatric help
Mm.
for what's going to have to happen with these mostly girls and young women. Once you get them out of these situations, they're going to need some help. And
Hmm.
so they do a lot of that with the Nazarene Fund.
Oh, good, good. Good shout outs at the beginning. We are not sponsored or affiliated with either of these groups. I've just been impressed with their work.
Hmm.
So wanted to shout it out because I mean, even if it my whatever percentage of this shirt helps save one person, that's
Hmm.
they say, oh, it's the end of the world. Well, sometimes it's the end of the world for somebody.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be a new world for somebody.
Yeah. Speaking of horrible darkness, we're starting out with the dark one. Seems appropriate somehow. Uh, that where we left off last time was because we have a kind of a meaty Rand section here where there's a lot going on in a relatively short amount of time, which is just furthering my belief that these Rand sections, this is what Jordan was focusing on when he knew his time was running out,
Hmm.
is let Harriet and Maria take care of the notes and for whoever was, going to come in and finish after him, let them take care of the notes. And he was focusing on these Rand sections because that is so much of what he was trying to say. And again, from the very beginning, the kernel that led to the Wheel of Time was the very last scene. That was the first thing to pop into his head. And then he kind of worked backwards from there in his mind until he had a story. And then he started working on the story. And so it just plus so much of from the very beginning, it's we're not even a third of the way through the eye of the world when we start getting the creepy dreams. So we're in the dream world and what that means very early.
Hmm.
So I think that says a lot about what Jordan was trying to say and what he felt was important in this really vast story. But then when you drill down on what's the main idea or main ideas, so much of it is thought and memory and who we are and what that means, and then how he's able to talk about that in the world of dreams.
Well,
Um,
memory, perception, cognition,
mhm.
all of these things that we kind of take it for granted, but they're kind of complicated. We're in the fight, and he's talking about seeing the pattern, but not actually seeing the pattern, splitting his mind in half. All of these visuals that Jordan is putting into this, and realistically, it's how our brain works anyways, because everything you see is actually just a wavelength. So he kind of describes that out loud.
That's a good point, and it was actually one of the thoughts I had when we get into this for the first edition hardcover that I'm in. It's on page 648 is where we left off. It starts with the Dark One attacked.
Hmm.
Um, and just right off the bat, it's ooh, that's interesting because it's an attempt to tear Rand apart to destroy him bit by bit.
Hmm.
Um, is what the Dark One is doing, but the way Jordan described this is this attack wasn't at his body, for he had no true body in this place, just a memory of one.
Hmm.
And so there you already have we're to the title here, a memory of light. So I love what he does here, and I got to think it's on purpose that he doesn't give you, one of the cheesy tropes that you like to laugh at is when they give you the title in a line. Um, and usually it's a cheesy trope because it's done cheesily.
Hmm.
It's like there's a zoom in and a dun 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 when he says the thing. And Jordan doesn't do that, but he gives you that a memory of one here. And then a little bit later, he's going to explain something like a beam of light. And I'm like, that's got to be on purpose,
Hmm.
of what he's trying to say here, because that's the way Jordan works, is the way he puts pieces, he puts, little breadcrumbs here and there for you to follow along. And I'm thinking that's got to be on purpose. Um, but it's also to your point, it's so many of his scenes are so good because they're doing more than one thing. And to your point, it's he's really driving home what I'm explaining to you. Don't take it too literally
Hmm.
because you can't. Um, my brother sent me down this rabbit hole recently, and I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. He's Doctor something or other because he's got a PhD in I don't remember if it's history or theology, and he goes down these rabbit holes of I believe the YouTube channel in the book is called The Unseen Realm, and it's I love the way he presents things because he's not saying this is the way it is. He's saying, well, this is really interesting, and it speaks to this idea that maybe the idea of spiritual warfare and heaven and hell, and maybe there's more there than we mostly Protestants tend to think or have thought and taught for a long time. Maybe there's more there. And it is kind of mind-blowing then if you think about it in that light, then go back and look at some of the Old Testament stuff and scratch your head and say, was this actually alluding to some kind of, as he calls it, unseen realm? But I referenced the book of Revelation earlier when we were talking about this place that Rand is in and the idea that what is being said in Revelation, what does this actually mean? Because you're talking about someone who's in the, just barely out of the Bronze Age, and he's trying to explain to other people in his space, in his, contemporary time, what these potentially far in the future things are, and how do you take someone in 90 AD and explain to them what an attack helicopter is?
Hmm.
That's one of the examples I've seen of people trying to explain Revelation and in the strange imagery. And same thing here. It's basically, the way I read it is, Rand is in a black hole. All right. How do you what the heck would that look like? I mean, we saw what Christopher Nolan's take on it was, and it was a little bit weird and cheesy, but how do you explain that? What would that look like? What would you feel? What would you see? And then, to Jordan's point here, how would your mind react to that?
Well, and this is where he takes a little artistic license because
Mm-hmm,
the fact is we can't know what's in a black hole,
mm-hmm,
and it could be all things or it could be nothing.
mm-hmm,
And I think that's what he's trying to go for, is because Rand's there, there's an element of all things, but realistically, the Dark One's saying there is absolutely nothing.
mm-hmm. Yeah. It, but even the dark one is, how much of that is true? Is it a purposeful lie of there is nothing and he's just trying to crush you with despair? Or is that the dark one speaking in a way that these temporal beings can understand? Because
Hmm.
we're about to see here in a second that there isn't nothing, because the dark one shows Rand a mirror world, a possible future of what happens if Rand loses, and there's definitely something there. There is substance there. He creates a thing. And so these are the rabbit holes your mind goes down the more you think about this and talk out loud of, what is the dark one and what is he saying and what is he doing? Because again, there is a something there, but he uses the language of oblivion.
Yeah, and I think a big part of this whole scene is the fact that Ishi was wrong
Mm,
and that the Dark One doesn't, he wants something to be there.
mhm,
He wants it to be the world, his world. He wants it to be a world full of entropy, but at the same time, he wants to be worshipped in this world. If the visions are to be believed, unless he's
mhm.
just trying to throw Rand off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the other interesting line here on this, in these first couple of short paragraphs on page 648. The other interesting line to me is that Rand walked into here full of piss and vinegar and ready to try and actually kill the Dark One, to destroy the
Hmm.
Dark One. And then he has this thought of, any notion of defeating the Dark One, of killing him, vanished, because all he can do is just sit there and try and exist, which, throwback to something earlier that I just thought of, is,
Well, this
remember
is
after
well,
he has his revelation, and what is it, Min who says, where have you been? And he says, existing, and
mhm.
she says, I didn't know that was so hard, and he says, well, it is.
Well, you brought up a Christian analogy. I'll bring up Buddhist here again. This is again where Rand kind of went off from just existing, which was his
Mm-hmm.
revelation, but then his idea of killing the Dark One is forcing nature.
Hmm.
And his revelation was, I am one with nature. Well, killing the Dark One is forcing nature because the Dark One exists.
Mm-hmm.
And just the fact that it exists and you exist means you're either forcing yourself on it or you're integrating it. A good example would be, and this is a human tendency, and this is we're designed this way, the ice bath experience. If you get in an ice bath, your body is fighting to stay warm, but eventually you become homeostatic with your environment, and you better get out because you're
Mm-hmm.
cooling down. And basically, Rand is plunged into the freezing cold water right now, and he is trying to fight that, which is his struggle with these visions. He is
Mm-hmm.
trying to fight reality, or at least the Dark One's version of reality here.
And initially, with whatever this attack is that is trying to unmake him, or so he feels, because we'll get to that in a second. He survives that, So it's interesting that he survives the existential attack, but then when he's shown something tangible, something he can see, smell,
Hmm.
touch, hear, that is when he really has to struggle. And I have to think that
Well,
that actually leads to my
and
go.
also a situation that bubbles up his emotions,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is important, is an important part of that. It's not just a world of blah.
Yeah,
It's not just a world of disgustingness of the blight. It is
yeah.
a world of disgustingness of the blight with Tam and Nynaeve and
Hmm.
Daniel and who, which is the one that died. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Uh,
Daniel and Jory.
yeah.
I think Jory is the one who dies, and Daniel's the one who takes him in to
Hmm.
be turned. But before we get there, and this is what was jumped out at me is Rand survives and he stands up and he says, rightly so, hey, is that the best you got? I'm not that boy that Ishamael tried to do this too. And I was a kid. I didn't know a dang thing. But now I'm a 500-year-old man
Hmm.
because I have all these memories, I have all this wisdom, I have all this experience now that I can draw on, and I have had this revelation that has brought me, you know, peace and wholeness. Is that the best you have? And the Dark One's response is really interesting to me, and it makes me go, you mistake. This is not an attempt to destroy you. This is preparation for what? To show you truth. And it then drives you deeper down this rabbit hole because wait a minute, again, you don't know because the Dark One, there is an element of the Dark One is the devil. There is an element of inspiration there, and um the one, I think it says in a couple of the Gospels, he Satan is the father of lies, and lies are his native tongue, basically, is what the scripture says.
Hmm.
And there is an element of that to the Dark One as well, of when the Dark One speaks, how much can you take it at face value? So is that a lie? Is that a no, actually the Dark One was trying to destroy you, and since he didn't, now he's going to spin it?
Well,
Or was that the truth?
and also remember my discussions early. I mean, I don't even remember what book we started this thought in, that the Dark One is nature's evil. It is the natural evil,
Mhm.
which evil used very loosely there. It is,
Lowercase e, yeah.
yeah, lowercase e. It is the baseness of acting on just your natural impulses, which for us humans we call emotions,
Hmm.
and just being beholden to them. Whereas Shatter Logoth was the epitome of Machiavellian human evil with the big E, human
Hmm.
evil. And
Purposeful, and there was an intent there.
yeah, there's cognition there. It's not just the video that comes to mind is the crocodile walking by the other crocodile, and one of them just saw something out of the corner of its eye. It turns and bites the leg off
Hmm.
the other crocodile, and the one that lost its leg looks at him like, "What the fuck, dude?" And then just keeps on walking with three legs, and then that's like the base nature, the metal of nature right there, and that's the
Hmm.
dark one. Then that's why it's so important that he's playing on the emotions to get Rand to do the wrong
Yeah.
thing.
So my thought here with this statement by the Dark One is, okay, so then if that's true, if it was just preparation, what does that say about the nature of this attack? Was this just pure stress or something else? Because it could just be pure
Trying to wear him
stress.
down,
Yeah. So,
or jabs to try to find a weak spot.
yeah.
If I'm going to play on your emotions, let me see which ones trigger you the most.
Hmm. And there is one of the kind of ways Rand thinks of and explains this attack is it feels infinite. It's like he's being poked and prodded in every pore all at once, kind of thing. So there is an element of let me pry at every facet of your being and see where your weak points are. So I know exactly how to craft this upcoming attack. But then there's probably also an element of you're going to be stressed. One of the most basic interrogation techniques, when it comes to enhanced interrogation is sleep deprivation.
Hmm.
Just
Yeah, I was going to
don't let
bring
you
up
sleep.
for our friend isomorphic the Russian sleep studies on prisoners.
Hmm.
They're pretty wicked on what exactly becomes of the human beings that
Yep.
used to be. I wouldn't even call them human afterwards. It's very
you you start
disturbing.
to lose that cognitive ability, and so you start to lose that no matter how well prepared you are, and we put our own guys through this so that they will be prepared, but no matter how well prepared you are, when your brain isn't able to function, the preparedness doesn't matter, because that preparedness is an active cognitive ability, and your brain starts to operate on pure instinct because it's just trying to hold itself together. Basically, it's just trying to manage its basic systems. And then we get to this point where I referenced earlier about the words and the imagery of a beam of light, um which I found interesting. As the dark one starts to take these fragments of the pattern, these threads, and the dark one starts to spin them, and the which again, down the rabbit hole, Alice, is what are these fragments of the pattern, where did they come from, how is the dark one able to do this, and what the dark one spins out here, Rand calls a mirror world.
Hmm.
But then what does that mean for what the dark one is able to do in the real world, in you know the first world, if you will? um but then, in weaving this thing, this mirror world, the way Rand's mind interprets this is the threads spun, not unlike the threads in a weave of the one power, only there were thousands upon thousands of them, and the colors were more varied, more vibrant. Each was straight like a string pulled taut, or a beam of light. And I think this is a purposeful earlier reference to the memory, and he's spotlighting it, but in a more subtle way because that's Jordan's style. And it just made me wonder, what exactly is he trying to say with the title, A Memory of Light?
Hmm.
And I think that's something that the title is something you want to keep in mind in all of these sections that we get to with Rand and the Dark One, because I think there's something very purposeful in that title, and I think it has to be referring most especially to this confrontation.
Hmm.
Okay, my next thought is several pages later. I don't know if you had any notes before then, but when Rand actually gets brought into this distorted mirror of Emmons Field.
No, no, I was already ahead of you on my notes when I talked about the last thing I said. So
Okay.
yeah. Now,
Well,
wait, there was one. Well, no, it's 7:20. There was just a moment where yeah. So it's after the section you're in right now.
okay. So when Rand gets brought in, and it's Nynaeve and Murdral that take him in, and he can see there's something wrong with her eyes, so she's been turned, and then he knows that's what's going to happen here. And again, this existential attack he's able to survive, but for me it's page 653. 13 of them, and 13 Madral gathering beneath that clouded sky. And he has this thought, and this is where he first begins to panic. uh what if they turned him? This wasn't real, but it was a version of reality, a mirror world created by the Dark One. What would it do to Rand if they turned him here? Had he been trapped that easily? He began to struggle, panicked against the bonds of air. It was useless, of course. So this is where he has his first real panic, and yet he was able to withstand the existential attack to such a degree that he was able to stand up and say, "Hey, is that all you have?"
Hmm.
Um, but the interesting thing to me is actually before that, the description of Emmons Field. It was a large city now. The houses had the feel of mice clustered together before a cat, each one of the same uniform dullness. And that jumped out at me, um, because I don't remember who I was watching. I was getting caught up on videos that I'd missed from the channels I follow, and one of them was using a lot of images and clips from the movie version of 1984,
Hmm.
and the drab, gray, dingy dullness, but also the uniformness. And the reason that jumps out is for anyone who has studied the history of the Marxist socialist movement. In the early 1900s, the Marxists were anarchists. Wait a minute. Communism is the antithesis of anarchy. Well, that's only if you believe the spin. They want the chaos to get the order.
Yeah, because you
So,
rebuild from the order, or you rebuild from the
exactly.
chaos. Yeah.
So to your point of the Dark One is speaking in the language of chaos, and yet what it creates, there is an order, but it's a twisted and warped kind of order that is used to feed rather than oppose the chaos.
Hmm.
Because as Rand calms himself and then is able to see the threads and find that connection he has back to the pattern, that bright pulsing thread that connects him to the pattern, and he's able to see the threads. He's able to see the world. He's able to see what has happened to his friends in this world. And one of the things he sees is that now the surviving Forsaken and these new Forsaken, like Nynaeve, they were each given their own little fiefdoms, but then they're expected to, like 1984, there is perpetual war. They are expected to build the resources of these little fiefdoms in order to fight their neighbors constantly. And this
Hmm.
ever shifting, and there is the chaos, this ever shifting global war, but within the little fiefdoms, there is this warped, twisted, as he says, same uniform dullness of order.
Well, I think it might be a symptom, not the bug. So if you give somebody total control of an area and they are a controlling type, they're going to make it organized like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do that in mass with different people, then there's going to be war. I think war is the byproduct of that. Because if you give total control to a controlling person, then they're going to perceive threat in every other person that has total control of their area. Because that's just the nature of human instinct right there.
The
So,
war is the byproduct from the human perspective, but I think that is one of the goals of the Dark One
well, I
because
think
it
he
is such
uses I
beautiful
think he
chaos.
uses humans flaws against each other.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Um,
Just funny because now we have the World Economic Forum where you will live in your pod and you will eat your bugs
and you will like it.
and you will like it. Your pod, everybody the same. Equity, equity, everybody the same,
Mhm.
right? How can you have equity if houses have different designs and one could look nicer than the other, right? People don't
Um,
think about that though.
I also like the line here as he's reading the pattern and seeing the history of this world the Dark One created, that nobody knew of him, nobody knew of the dragon, and anyone who could channel was discovered as a youth and turned. The Dark One did not like the risk that someone would bring hope back into the world. But is it Solzhenitsyn who said one truth teller can bring down a tyranny?
Hmm.
Paraphrasing here, but I think that was a Solzhenitsyn line.
Yeah, and there's also modern Brett Weinstein where he talks about scientific publications and stuff, and he says the
Mm-hmm,
magic number is zero. As
mm-hmm.
as long as one allows for truth, for real truth, they can't win. The magic number is zero.
Oh, geez, you're about to get us canceled because I don't know if you've been paying attention, but a story that's been making the rounds the last couple of days is a affirming care advocate doctor who got a $10 million grant to do a huge study on affirming care
Yes, yes,
and
that was
won't
on my
release
list
the
of things to
results.
talk about on our next
Mhm.
next social episode.
Yeah, and won't release the results.
Well, the
Yep.
results are out though.
They're not
They just,
publishing them, but
yeah,
the results
yeah,
have been leaked. Yep.
yeah. They're out there, but they can always say, "Oh, that's not peer reviewed."
Hmm.
Yeah, because you
Hmm.
won't let it be published.
Hmm.
Hmm.
All right, and then it ends with Rand saying, "I will show you what is going to happen," and we'll get there eventually, maybe next year sometime at this rate. But anyway, um, then it switches to an Egwene point of view, um, where we're switching back to the battle, and we're going to see some more of the pieces that Matt is moving around here, because we kind of we left off with the last battle part of it with him sending that message to Galad, and so he's up to something there with moving Galad and his people over to help Elaine, and now we see he's moving Egwene and her White Tower army somewhere else. Um, but I think the more interesting bit here, and really my only note on this section, is how right at the beginning here, it can't be an accident that we have shifted from the Dark One remaking reality to suit its own image to Egwene bending down to study these black cracks of nothingness.
Hmm.
But not only that, so that's the first order thinking, I think, is you see this nothingness, these black cracks that the more you look at them, the more you realize that's not just a hole. That is nothing. That is a black hole. Um, but then she reaches out and weaving by instinct, she's kind of able to heal this one little spot. Well, where we just left off with Rand, Rand starts weaving the pattern itself by instinct.
Hmm.
And that is essentially what Egwene is doing here, is on a smaller scale because she can't see and manipulate the pattern like Rand can. Rand has this unique connection to the pattern itself. What the one power is a byproduct of the pattern itself. Essentially, it is
Hmm.
the part that humanity is able to manipulate in the same way that we do physics and engineering and
Yeah, I was going to
chemistry
say it's
here.
representation of humans' ability to control their environments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, air
But
conditioning.
it's
Air conditioning is a wonderful thing.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
it is. I learned that in Korea. It was a nice reminder. So she is using the byproducts, the tools of the weave. Rand is in a position and in a strange ethereal place where he is able to manipulate the threads directly.
Well, I don't think it's an accident that she's technically doing it in that same ethereal place. If you think of
Mhm.
the cracks as an extension of that black hole, that void that Rand stepped into.
That's a good point. Um, I also think it's not an accident because I don't have a lot to say about this section, but the next section we're going to switch to Gawain's point of view as he goes after Demandred, and the things Demandred is saying are really interesting in light of this because Yukiri points out that, and I think this is interesting too. The um we first start to see this with Balefire,
Hmm.
but Yukiri makes the point that actually we're seeing these spider web cracks of nothingness whenever the Dreadlords channel. It's just so much worse when they use Balefire. So
Because they're using the true power.
I don't think it's the true power because I think the Dark One is stingy with that, and there's way too much channeling going on here. But I wonder how
It
much of it is, remember those black threads that connected that Rand was able to see, that connect the Forsaken back to the Dark One.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be just the tides of battle.
Mm.
If the dark one is winning, more of that
Mm.
shows up. Or if the, and
There's an
then if
interesting thought. Yeah,
yeah.
that as the
It's like
shadow
Vegas odd
wins,
markets, you know? They kind of go
right?
back and forth as the odds change, and as the odds play into the favor of the Dark One because of Grendel's machinations with the generals and Demandra just blowing the shit out of everybody,
Hmm.
you know, that it increases the odds the Dark One's gonna win, which actually increases his power in the world.
Yeah. I did have another thought about this section that I just realized that I didn't write down, but I wonder if this is further proof that Sanderson just really doesn't like Egwene. Um, because when she realizes Gawain isn't there and she sins and Brian volunteers to go get him.
Hmm.
Um, Knowing how this is going to end up, knowing what's going to happen because of this is already bad enough and makes you go, "Oh gosh, Egwene, what have you done?" But also the way she does it is Gawain. I don't know that I buy it, and maybe it's just my bias against Gawain because of how bad he was for so long. But in Gawain's own mind, in his perspective, he is telling you that no, this isn't about ego anymore. This isn't about me being the hero. This has to be done, and I'm in a position to do it. And as he thinks, Egwene and Logain, they're probably the two most powerful channel. They are the two most powerful channelers here, since Rand's not here. But it wouldn't make sense to risk them going after Demandred. I can do it without putting the whole army uh, in a position where if one of them goes down, that's a big effing deal and a big blow to the side of the light. If I go down, I'm just one swordsman.
Hmm.
So whether you believe it or not, at least in his mind, in his justification, this is a selfless sacrifice. And what does Egwene say when she sends Brian out to go find him? Someone go find my fool warder.
Hmm.
It just makes me go, yeah, I think I'm right in that Sanderson just really doesn't like Egwene.
Yeah, because I didn't think it was a bad moment for Godwin at all.
Hmm.
Uh, he had a chance to change things to really matter, and when you talk about male risk taking in general,
Yeah,
it revolves around that every time. When it's actually that's what we keep talking about as one of the dangers with young men is this nihilistic mentality, the ho hum, what does it matter kind
yeah,
of mentality that's been going around that's been destroying young men. This is actually very natural for a 22, 23-year-old guy to
yeah,
think in his head and very natural behavior to result from it. Whether he's right or wrong is irrespective of the fact that it's a very wholesome motivation.
yeah, yeah. Um, it's the it's the guy who joins the military because he wants to be a hero and wants medals versus the one who actually wants to serve and
Hmm.
actually cares about the people on the home front because that's the kind of guy who, much like with Rand and the existential versus the personal attack, is it's one thing to be thinking I'm here so everyone at the home front doesn't have to be here, but really what drives you in the moment is going to be that buddy beside you.
Well, and let's make the complicated a little less complicated. Yes, the medals and all of that is a motivation for a lot of young men, but where did the medal, the drive to give the acclamation to
Mm-hmm.
those people come from? Because it's a positive behavior for the life of your tribe, the life of your people, the life
Mm-hmm.
of your in group to want to go out and sacrifice for it. So yeah, some people will be like, oh, social construct of celebrating these people cause them to do this stupid thing. It's like, no, maybe the several 10,000 years of human civilizations has created the fact that we give medals to these people because they're the ones that keep saving us.
Mm-hmm.
So, this, I hate the whole social construct argument because they're like, oh, everything's a social construct. And I'm like, and I always go, well, where did the construct come from?
Mm-hmm.
We can't just engineer everything. These things, the best ones, the ones that live through antiquity that become your archetypes, are the ones that came from human behavior as a social animal.
We like to bring up cooking a lot because that is a great example of this social construct of, well, cooking is just a social construct. Yeah, and you'd better not throw it out because then we're going to have to reset on which mushrooms feed us, which ones give us groovy trips, and which ones kill us.
Or the fact that, without fire on your meat, for the most part, you
Hmm.
die,
Hmm.
especially if it's chicken or pork.
Hmm. Well, or
Yeah.
most recently, McDonald's having to do this recall. And my first thought was, well, no, hold on a second. I'll have to double check with the food inspector veterinarian on this, but my understanding is the FDA guidelines for cooking beef that they have to cook to in those fast food restaurants, it would kill the E. coli. So it's probably not the beef unless
No,
that many
they
places
determined
are
it was the
undercooking it.
onions.
And then lo and behold, a few
Yeah.
days later, oh, actually no, it was raw produce that got cross contaminated.
Well, and even further, it has to be in a processing facility for it because of how widespread it was. It wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
some worker picking onions, took a poop next to the
Yep.
onions and then picked one out. There had to be some sort of error in the processing center that distributed these things.
Mm-hmm. Um, I had a thought. Where was it? I lost it. You gave me another thought. Now I've forgotten it.
Risk-taking
Oh.
meaning it,
No, I remember. Yeah. So we're moving on from Egwene here and into Gawain's section, and it made me think. One of the books I was reading while I was on vacation, and we used to make young people read these kinds of books, and we should go back to it. I finally got around to reading Audie Murphy's autobiography, To Hell and Back, and one of the interesting things to it, because I've seen the movie where he plays himself, and one of the criticisms of these things is, oh, they glorified war and they didn't show you the, well, they might have in the movie. He did not in the book. The book is very raw. He does not pull punches, both with what happened, what it did to the people, what it did to his men. There are a couple of times where I reference Band of Brothers because it's so dang good. And if you just if you just give up on your men, they will hate you. If you just
mhm.
give up on your brothers, they will hate you. But
Well, that's with sports too. It's not just the military, you
and,
know.
and so you see that in that the episode in Bastogne where Donnie Wahlberg, the company first sergeant, is narrating, and they don't respect the company commander because he's not there. He's not at the front with them. Buck Compton, Lieutenant Compton, he finally breaks, and no one thinks less of him because he's been there and because they all know, because they've all experienced it themselves or seen it firsthand. Everyone's got a breaking point. And with what Compton and these other guys have had to go through, yeah, you're going to break. And nobody thinks less of you that you break down and start bawling and you can't keep going. And that happens a couple of times in Murphy's autobiography, is he makes the point, and because it eventually he goes through so much and they suffer so many casualties, he eventually ends up getting commissioned, and he is the company commander. And he has to. There's this lieutenant that he has that is in the same boat he is. As they started out enlisted, so many people died. He got a commission, and he's one of the platoon commanders. And he breaks, but he won't stay at the hospital. He comes back to the front line, and Murphy knows this ain't good. He's not gonna last because he knows what they're gonna go through. And sure enough, he lasts for a little while and then he breaks again. And he has to send a private message back with him saying, don't let this guy leave the hospital again. Just
Hmm.
don't. And he doesn't think any less of him. It's just, you're done, guy. You did all you could and you're done now. And there is an element of that here with Godwin of, you did all you could. You need to stop pushing yourself, but he won't, because there's no one there to say. He doesn't have a, he is being Lan and Egwene is not being Moiraine. Lan is still alive because he had Moiraine and then he had Nynaeve. And they said, no, you've done enough. The same thing that Lan does in that great scene in Knife of Dreams where Nynaeve wants to go out and go back to healing, and Lan says, no, you're not rested enough. You've
Mhm.
done enough for now. You need a rest. Now it's time to rest. Now it's time to recover. Gawain doesn't have that. That's why he ends up where he does, because there's no one to say, no, man, you've done enough. You know, this is where you need to be now. And so he's going to push and push and push until he gets to the point where he puts on 3 of these freaking rings that he has been told and he has seen firsthand, these things are going to kill you. And he puts on 3 of them.
Mhm. Yeah, I wonder how much, because sometimes when you're dying, you just feel a need to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how much the rings actually affected this decision,
Yeah,
because
because we,
he knew he was going to die. He kind of
yes,
talked himself into it that maybe it's not going to happen to me. But there's a point where he's like, yeah, I'm pretty much dying.
yes.
And and I think that also played into it.
So we know they do from this point pushing him forward because he can feel it. Like when he
Mm,
looks down and he sees that his hands are red and cracked from burns and he doesn't feel them and he goes, "Oh, that can't be good." Yeah, it's not. You know, there I forget what it's called. There is a condition where you don't feel pain and it is incredibly dangerous.
hmm. Yeah,
Um,
they don't live long.
yeah. So we just have to assume and surmise that since he has been using the at least one of these rings off and on, that's how he helped get Egwene out of the Sanchin attack or the Sharan attack. That we just have to assume that may have influenced what he does. But then once he puts them all on, they definitely push him forward.
Hmm.
Um, and he feels that when he lashes out and he kills that Trolloc because he's carrying a warder off to have a snack, and he knows that guy. He knows Simeon, the warder, used to be his friend, likes to play cards, and so he acts on this, feral instinct to kill the Trolloc, and then goes, the cognitive of his mind pulls back forward and says, "Whoa, dude, why? That was not worth it. The point here is to go get Demandred,
Hmm.
and you didn't actually save him because he's going to end up in a cook pot anyway."
Hmm.
Um, Speaking of madness, but then we get to Demandred, which for me is page 663. And to me, I like this because this is a very different kind of madness from Alon, the nihilistic philosopher, but
Hmm.
it's still madness. It is the, you know, sociopathic, self-justification, Machiavellian.
The problem is he's not wrong.
Exactly. But that's why it works, because it is very Thanos, right? That's why Thanos worked so well as the ultimate villain in the MCU, is because as we finally got to see him and hear him and go, oh, I know why he's doing it, and boy, that's hard to argue with. That's what makes it so compelling. Same thing here with Demandred, is when he starts to have this back and forth with Gawain. Um, where is it? Where he says it?
Well, yeah. Well, in fact, it's 7:30 for me, but has your dragon not murdered?
Yep.
Has your sister never killed to keep, dare say, seize her throne?
Mhm.
And actually, it's not only that he's right, it's that it's actually what we hated about her because she did it with willy-nilly.
Yeah.
It wasn't that she just did what was necessary. She wasted so many lives in what she did.
And it's also, now that you bring that up, you giving me a thought here before we get to Demandred. It's also why Gawain, I think Sanderson is trying to redeem him here, because he is at his core is good, but then he lets his emotions lead him astray. It's what Brian was trying to teach him, when he shows up in the Rebel Aes Sedai camp, is your instincts are good, but then you let your emotions lead you astray and you don't think it through. Is Godwin is also right in that, well, it's different. It is different. There's a difference between it is why Dennis Prager harps on no in the original Jewish, in the original Hebrew, it is not thou shalt not kill, it is thou shalt not murder, because there is a difference. There's a, yes, you can kill. You can kill to protect, or you can kill for vengeance, you can kill for rage, you can kill on accident. It's different. So Godwin's instincts here in trying to banter with Demandred, he's also not wrong of it's different, but he doesn't know how to articulate that because he doesn't know how to think it through. And that's where he is a flawed and
Well,
failed would-be hero.
it's the difference between it's different if it's my side versus it's different if it saved more lives in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference there. Which I mean,
The
it's hard to argue against that when you're fighting a Forsaken, you
Yep.
know. It is kind of written in the contract, but
Yeah. Um, but I like the way that this this banter also to me connects back to Egwene and those cracks into nothingness, and which connects back to right before it, the Dark One, in the Dark One attacking and bantering with Rand. That Demandred's justification for what he is doing is really very compelling. And also you see that in that mirror world that the Dark One creates, because Demandred says, yeah, well, Gawain is the incredulous, would-be hero who doesn't know how to articulate, think, and then act truly heroic. Poor schmuck. You'd have us join the shadow instead? Yes, Demandred's eyes were cold, as opposed to kind of the ravings of some of the other crazy for evil Forsaken. If I kill Lews Therin, in victory, I will be given the right to remake the world as I wish. The great Lord cares nothing for rule. The only way to protect this world is to destroy it and then shelter its people. Is that not what your dragon claims he can do?
mhm.
You see the cold evil logic of Demandred, but then in that you also see why the Dark One works the way he works. Because there's also an echo there of um Perrin bantering with Slayer. And the Dark One doesn't discard tools. He may punish you for failure, but he does not discard a useful tool. Why? Well, because that tool ultimately feeds his primary goal, which is death, destruction, chaos. I'm fine with whatever order you, Demandred, are going to create out of this, because ultimately you're going to get there through death, destruction, and chaos, and you're going to maintain that order with death, destruction, and chaos. And so I love the way these three scenes connect to that main idea of the Dark One, what the Dark One is trying to do, and how the Dark One is trying to do it.
And then Godwin dies.
Well, not yet, but he's definitely gonna.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, he's dying.
well, it's interesting too, because I had forgotten this part, and I want to put a pin in this to keep an eye on it for when we see Demandred again later. Is so I'd mentioned that I thought one of the plot holes here was Demandred continuing to yell for Lews Therin. How do you not know he's not here?
Hmm.
Okay. But I feel like this scene, this back and forth between Demandred and Gawain mostly closes it. I still think it's a little bit weak, but it mostly closes that plot hole. With because Demandred goes off on this tangent about how I wasn't entirely sure, but now I am that maybe he's wearing the Mirror of Mists and he is Cawthon. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
he's sending messages to Cawthon, but I can tell. To me, that's interesting. That um, Matt is such a good general, and and again, it's because he's older than he actually is because he has all these memories. Well, same thing with Rand, and Lews Therin was centuries old and had all these memories, this experience. Matt is so good. Demandred thinks he's Lews Therin. Demandred thinks he's fighting someone from the Age of Legends.
Yeah, the thing that makes it weak to me is I actually had this later when I think it's Galad is fighting Demandred and they're talking back and forth, but it fits right here too. Is he's convinced it's Lews Therin and he keeps talking about he doesn't specifically say here, but I think he says it to Galad that a millennia of experience is what he's
Yes.
attributing to the ability. And I'm like, no, you're only a millennia old because you were in stasis. The Mandrid is longer lived than most humans because
Mm-hmm.
of Age of Legends technology and the fact that he's powerful in the power, but it's not millennia.
Yeah,
He's
we should look that up, but I thought they were like 300 to 500 years old.
but that's not millennia.
Yeah, yeah.
And but where in contrast, he is correct. Matt has millennia of experience because he has all the generals for the last 3,000 years in his head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Not just the individuals, but then the eras those individuals represent.
mhm.
Uh, but the other thing he says, where he says, you've proven to me that Lews Therin is here, is that weave about you is proof enough because he identifies the weave that the rings use. And
Mhm.
he says no one of this age should have any knowledge of that weave. um but then there's this little tidbit that he adds because we always have to have these little kernels of mystery is but I have a greater one. So it's not just that he's a really good swordsman with a lot of experience. He has some kind of weave around him
Mm.
that is helping him and is making him so good, that is making him able to withstand three of these freaking rings where one is supposed to be really hard to
Well,
fend off, if
I
not
want I wonder
impossible.
if that helps him in a minute here too when he fights Logain.
Yeah.
Because remember, Logain did get the best of him at one point, and we'll get
Mm-hmm.
to that here in a second.
Yeah. Um, but just something to put a pin in and keep an eye on, because that is intriguing. Um, I like that he just leaves him to die because to me it's not, you know, Austin Powers mockery levels of, no, we're not going to watch him die. We're just going to leave them in this impo- ludicrous, position where they will surely die, and then we'll just go away and assume they die. It's because I think Jordan and now Sanderson have done a good enough job establishing the narcissism of Demandred, how how big his ego is, but how well deserved it is. So he knows that's a dead man walking. I
Hmm.
mean, he was already a dead man walking because of the weave around him, but now I've just given you a mortal blow. You're dead. And hey, if you do live long enough to see Lews Therin, you tell him to come get me. You tell him we're not done. The only way for this to end is me and him one on one.
Hmm.
So I like that he doesn't belabor the point, but he does give us enough there to say, no, of course he's just going to give him a mortal gut wound and then walk off because you're beneath him. All right. And then that is the end of that. Do we got time to keep going a little bit more or do we want to stop it there?
We can give it about another 15 minutes. We didn't cover much ground yet. So.
Yeah. Well, where are your next points? Because
I had a little something with the Fail section where she's Mendevwin is trying to convince
mhm,
Fail that Vanon's not that bad of a guy, and she's got all these plots in her head and putting thoughts about men, what men really think, is what she thinks men really think. And Mandiv, when she makes a comment about him that, well, he's too simple to think that they're thinking beyond simple.
mhm.
And my comment was maybe because we do have uncomplicated motives most of the time. And it turns out that that was right. But that was my only note in that section. Uh, my next one is the interaction between who is it? Oh shit, did I not have any notes for that next parent section?
Well, so I'm hemming and hawing over this Fail section because I can't decide if in these rereads and thinking about it more, I like it less or more. But I remember not liking her sections in the last battle for a number of reasons.
Well, it just seemed
And
like he was really going out of his way to have an overcomplicated way for the horn to get into a certain place at a certain time.
yes, it,
Yeah.
it that's probably it, that it feels contrived. It also feels, I think to your point, it feels like either Sanderson also doesn't like Fail in the way he doesn't like, seems to not like Egwene and is really painting her in a bad light, or he just doesn't understand Fail. Because there are times where it seems like he does. There are times where it seemed like he was really working hard to rehabilitate Perrin and Fail and remind us that, hey, we actually do like these characters. These are good characters. Just remember, they are youngsters in a new marriage, and they just went through a very, very traumatic experience.
Hmm.
I'm harkening back to that moment where they sit and they have their anniversary picnic, basically, and they talk this out. They finally kind of talk things out a bit. But then here, he kind of seems to undo that and backtrack with this line at the very beginning where, to your point, Mandovan is trying to explain to Fail, no, there's something else going on here. These aren't bad people. And Fail is just thinking. Fail ate her midday rations in silence, listening with as much patience as she could muster to Mandovin's protest. She wished Perrin were here so she could have a good argument. She felt as if she would burst from pressure. And I just go, you're feeding into the tropes and stereotypes for why so many of the fans didn't like Fail for so long. That she's
Which,
just a shouty harridan of a woman.
yeah, what, and that might be just his lack of understanding, being able to mind read people that aren't exactly like himself, including a female perspective. Uh, Whereas actually in the next, Perrin. Okay, so let me have a comment about the Perrin section that's next.
Uh,
I didn't write anything down, but it popped in my head. With Jordan, anytime we had like something that needed to be a little bit of a glue, especially when it came to world travel, he would bail Doman it. You know,
mhm.
he would jump in. It's time for Bail Doman to make everything right again. Does it not seem like Sanderson is doing that with Uno?
Mm,
He- he's like, "Oh, I can't be alone with you again while I'm stuck in a bed," and she's like, "Oh, I took care of that," and all of a sudden Uno's there.
huh.
He keeps popping up in these random places.
That's a good point. And maybe it's a bit of fan service because Uno is such a fan favorite and he disappeared for so long.
Hmm. Well, and Bail
Um,
Doman became such a lack of interest character since he wasn't the smuggler anymore. Since he
yeah,
became the Sojin, he actually, I think he lost fan favor at that point. He kind
yeah.
of became a simp for Leolwyn, Aegeanin.
Hmm. That's a good point. Um, there was something that jumped out at me here that kind of connects all that we're talking about here, and it was back in the file section. Yeah, here at the beginning of this that file section, which for me is 665. She's listening to Mandevin, and she has this thought. Um, that look of pure terror in Vannon's eyes when he'd been caught was confirmation enough, if catching him with the horn in his hands hadn't been. Um, actually, no, you're just, that could also be confirmation of what Mandevin is saying, is that no, these are simple guys with simple motives, and you're spinning this complicated web
Mm-hmm.
because that's what you're used to, both as a woman and as a noble. These are just dudes, man. And that is, ironically, and perhaps there's a purposeful irony here, is that she needs to remember that's one of the things that she loves so much about Perrin. Perrin's just a dude, man. He
Yeah.
thinks deeper than most people give him credit for,
Well, and
but
if you
ultimately he's a pretty simple guy without being simplistic.
well, and if you were to think deeper, she knows Vannon's role in the whole band of the Red. I guess she really didn't know too much, but she knew he was
Yeah.
the best scout ever. Mandevin has told her over and over and over
Yep.
again. It actually would, if you really thought deeply about conspiracies, if he had been looking to find the horn, he wouldn't have gotten caught. The
Hmm.
fact that the horn was a surprise is the reason he got caught,
Hmm. Yeah. Um,
which is how they justify it here in a little bit. But this whole section was unnecessary because, like we just said, it was a contrived way of getting the horn to a certain place that I think made a couple of characters that were fan favorites look stupid and cartoony.
hmm.
And as to your point, made Fail look like a like a bitch.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a bit of a problem because she is actually being a pretty darn good leader here, uh,
Hmm.
in a very difficult situation. I mean, um, like the last line of her section here is, uh, "We need to do some planning." So she scouts out what they've run into, what's going on, and then, all right, we need to think through what we're seeing here and how we're going to approach this. And so that part of it is good, but it kind of gets undone. Well, if I'm going to give her the the highest benefit of the doubt, she's convinced that she has found two dark friends, but she isn't, she's overthinking, but she's not necessarily overreacting. Right? So it could be, no, we're going to go hunt these two dark friends down and kill them. It's no, we press on, I keep my people safe, we keep our eyes and ears open, and be careful. So if I'm going to give the most benefit of the doubt, she is overthinking, but at least she's not overreacting.
Hmm.
So that's something, I guess. Um, and then we get a long parent section that's, I don't know, long-ish with him.
Again, it just seems a little pointless. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
this is where Perrin is,
Yes,
and he's gonna take a nap now.
that's
That's it.
that's been my biggest frustration with so much of Perrin's parts in this last book is, and I kind of ranted about this at the meeting there at Marilore Fields, is this is why he's here. This is what he's supposed to do. This is his leg of the stool. Matt offers something else to Rand, is another, you know, friend and ally for Rand, Matt, for Rand to lean on, and Matt helps him in this way. Here, in this moment, this is why Perrin the blacksmith is so important to Rand. And I felt it was a little quick, and it gets overshadowed by so much of the back and forth with Slayer that ultimately never goes anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like the cheesy, cartoony, the bad guy gets away because of course the bad guy gets away because the bad guy always gets away because we need him, a couple episodes later. Well, come on, man. We've got a lot going on, and this is the time where storylines are supposed to be getting resolved.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't feel like anything is resolved or advanced here. We're just spinning our wheels with Perrin in Lane's palace healing up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have more interesting things to say about more interesting things next time, but I think that's about the point we need to wrap it up so you can do real life stuff.
Yeah, I did have a shorter window today. But let's go ahead and do this again on Wednesday so we can get
Yep.
back on our normal schedule because that was working better for me being able to read this on well, I mean, I've already read through this chapter, but being able to go over this stuff again on Tuesday night to kind of decompress from class and then use the this part of the week for doing the homework and get ready for the next Tuesday class, the wheel of time, right? Keep going in circles.
Yep.
But we didn't cover much ground, but also we were a little out of practice. So we'll get through, I think we'll get through a lot next time. I do have more notes going forward, but sometimes that's better for me. The more notes I have, the more efficient I am. But yeah, any we didn't do comments.
Oh, hello.
I have them up already if you
All right.
oh gosh. Okay, so the first one, during your discussion of Tam's mind technique, it hit me that RJ was deep in the void when he was writing clothes and costumes of different cultures.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean he's damn good at it, and I think he seemed like an obsessive type where he probably, as Harriet would say, that he would come home and be practicing. She would like, I know which character he's writing because of the way he's acting today. And he would kind of put himself in that
Mm.
mindset, which is
Yeah,
a
I forgot
version of
about
the
that
void.
quote of hers. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a form of the void because it is putting yourself in that world and focusing on it. Yeah, and I think he did that with cultural. I think he was just interested in culture in general.
Hmm.
So he wanted it to be a major theme, which is why I don't like the show because they blended everything. There is no separate cultures. And but yeah, I think you're right. Second comment, Sam's parallel between mutual bonding and orgasm made me orgasm, no homo.
That's important.
Actually, my first note for the next part that we get into has to do with that because we have Andrel and Pavara again. Uh, so this one's a long one. All right. So as I'm listening to you discuss the chapter 37, I'm glad Heath didn't skip on that one, by the way. I realize there is not much I remember from it.
Hmm.
It felt epic and exhausting in the moment, but the more time has passed, the less epic and more exhausting it became in hindsight. It's a lot of busy work, as we just talked about. I do remember the Logain and Black Tower parts plus the Demandra stuff, some Egwene stuff, but does that justify 180 or something pages? I don't know, but it's fine.
Yeah.
I think that speaks for the last three books in general. But yeah,
It, it it is my constant complaint about Sanderson and why I keep bringing up that um I've read something like four of his books and I vaguely remember them. It's like that's how
well,
he writes.
I think it actually was a mistake to do a massive chapter with so many perspectives.
Yeah.
I think he was going for a climax with that, but at the
Hmm.
same time, there's a reason textbooks are broken up into chapters, so you
Hmm.
remember the material. And I think he would.
It's the argument that of the binge versus the weekly model
Mhm.
of okay, you binge this show on Netflix, but and you're all excited about it, but then it is very quickly forgotten versus the if you're having to tune in one episode weekly on HBO or Prime or whatever, and then it has more time to sink in.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, realistically, we covered 20 pages on my version, which I think is
Hmm.
less than 20 pages in yours.
Hmm.
And we had Rand, Egwene,
Egwene,
Gawain, Fail,
and then
uh,
Perrin.
and then Perrin. And a bunch of that was didn't have a whole lot of substance. We hit
Yeah.
Perrin in about 2.5 minutes,
I mean,
realistically.
yeah, our comments on the Egwene and Gawain section were just really small snippets of what actually happened, and weren't a lot on what happened so much as these deeper, interesting things about the nature of this conflict and the nature of the Dark One.
Hmm.
Um, it is. I'm one of the videos on one of the channels I watch. I think I've referenced it, a guy named Master Samwise is the channel, and he does some interesting videos on um characters, and he's done some really good ones on masculinity. Uh, uh, I think I sent you one that I thought you would like, which was him using Kratos in the most recent God of War, the one that takes place uh in the North, using him as an example of proper masculinity. Um, and so he's done some videos on that. But his most recent one that I'm not looking forward to watching is why everyone should read the Stormlight Archive, which is one of Sanderson's big series is. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure the I read the first two or three of those. I don't even know if it was two or three, but those were one of the ones I read, and I don't really remember anything about them. So I'm
Hmm.
curious why he thinks every nerd should read it, because to me, they were literally forgettable.
Yep. I have nothing to add to that.
All right, well then we will see y'all Wednesday, and theoretically, for those of you unfortunates who actually watch this, you'll see my face again because I'll have to get a new camera since I seem to have broken mine, and then we'll see how far we get.
All right. Later, guys and gals.